And record. All right. So how you doing?
I'm great. How you doing?
All right. A little stressed out, school and work and all that fun stuff of being a young adult.
Gets
So
easier and then not, actually.
I hope it does get easier.
Mhm.
Yeah, just going for that psychology degree, maybe a political science minor. Uh,
Mhm.
might might regret that. So how was your week? What do you do for a living actually?
So I founded an organization called the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values,
Hmm.
which pushes back against woke ideology in the Jewish world, but also tries to build bridges with other ethnic and religious communities in support of liberal values.
Does it make money through donations only, or do you have like other things that uh
Donations, yes.
oh,
So we've in the last 3 years we've grown a lot. We're about 9 staff people now. So we're a significant organization.
okay. Do they get paid or are they all just volunteers?
No, we're all paid. Yeah, we pay our people.
Oh, cool, cool. Can I get a job? Maybe later. So you
Yeah,
wrote
come
the
back.
oh, sorry, were you saying something?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
You wrote the book Woke Antisemitism, right?
I did.
So
Yes.
unfortunately that's not in any library in my state, so I'm gonna have to buy that later. But you mind telling me what exactly it's about?
Well, it's a bit of a memoir, really, even though it might not sound that way. I start tracing my own professional life in the Jewish world, the Jewish advocacy world, when I started becoming aware that there's this ideology that was setting in on the left. I'm a center left person. I've been center left my entire life. And but I center left on policy positions. It wasn't that I had any grand explanation for why things were, and all of a sudden I started to encounter people who had these grand explanations for why things are. And it was that the haves were causing the conditions of the have-nots, and the haves were the white power establishment, white supremacy. And this is something I became acutely aware of, let's say, in the late 1990s, and started to warn my friends and colleagues in the Jewish world that there's an ideology that's catching on that I think could be bad for us. And I think that's bad for society. And so I wrote my first opinion piece about it in 2002, I believe. And I also wrote a memo to my professional colleagues back then, warning them that there was an ideology that was setting in many of the immigrant rights advocacy groups that we had been working with, that once had seen America as an imperfect country trying to live up to its own high ideals, and now saw America as a pervasively racist, white supremacist country. And I thought that's dangerous. That's not good for their own upward mobility. It's not good for society that they see themselves that way. And it's only going to lead to resentment and tension in the long run. And so again, I've been seeing this happen for more than 2 decades. I guess, not a newcomer to the discussion. In 2016, I wrote an article on intersectionality on my first day of my last job, which was CEO of the umbrella organization of that coordinated Jewish advocacy around the United States. And it and basically I was responded to with, I think, 9 opinion pieces that took me on and said that my description of intersectionality was completely off base and unfair and blah 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 blah. So again, I've been at this for a while, and it was not until after George Floyd 2021 when I finally left and started this new enterprise.
What exactly about the whole George Floyd riots really sparked that decision?
Yeah, it was really the atmosphere afterwards. It became completely stifling. You asked me about my book, by the way, and I didn't really say
Yeah.
about my book, but my book traced that experience and then
Mhm.
talked about how a unique variant of anti Semitism was emerging from this ideological discourse on the left that saw the world as divided neatly between oppressed and oppressors, and Jews, by virtue of their perceived skin color, by virtue of their perceived position in society, were being lumped in with the white oppressor class. So that's the source of the anti-Semitism that comes from this ideology. Um, but after George Floyd, things started to get really ugly. People started to become, I thought, really snarky and nasty to each other. There was a group of people that saw themselves now as sort of the ideological paragons, and they would tell everybody else how they had to think, what they had to say. And I thought it bred resentment. I thought it shut down discourse. The Jewish community is sort of known to be a um, debate-oriented, contentious group of people, and I thought it was outrageous that ideologues were coming in and shutting down the debate on really important conversations about what was going on in society, why there's disparity, why there are problems. We need to be able to debate those issues because otherwise you don't get to the best thinking. And they said, no, I'm sorry, we have all the answers. So this was to me pushing back against the people with all the answers.
Yeah, I think that was probably around the I could be wrong, but I think that was probably the height of the BLM movement. I remember a lot of people I knew, especially my age, were promoting the whole Blackout Tuesday thing. George Floyd got like a gold casket. He had his face painted on a Holocaust museum, which I thought that was really messed up. A little
Right.
disrespectful.
Yes, I thought that was too. And it's not that George Floyd was treated well, although there's some interesting new evidence that he might have been, I think, was it high on fentanyl or something? But
Yeah,
yeah, so,
sorry.
but still, I was willing to countenance the possibility that there was very serious problems in our policing. I still think that there are probably individual police forces that have some institutional racism and the like, but I didn't believe that that meant that American society was pervasively racist, that there had been no progress in race relations or in the mobility of Black people in America. So I rejected that, and I was yearning for an authentic conversation in which maybe I was wrong, but at least I would get somebody else's best thinking because we could debate it. But I was shut down for just even suggesting we could debate these issues. And I thought, okay, this is off the rails. I have to push back against this. And I was no longer comfortable doing the work that I had always done.
Yeah, I remember like after the whole George Floyd situation, I had a bit of a little identity crisis. I thought, oh well, this is pretty messed up. Was I wrong about police racism? Maybe cops are more racist, but I looked more into this and I actually became like more anti-BLM and more pro-police afterwards because of all the riots and all the defenders and all this whole ACAB um what was it? Defund the police movement and
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I mean, Black Lives Matter didn't have to mean one thing. I mean, Black lives do matter, right? I mean, I
yeah.
have no problem saying that. I had a friend who was a pastor at a church who used to take his congregants to Israel every year. He's a very friendly, sweet guy, not a radical by any means, and he has a big Black Lives Matter poster on the front of his church. Do I think he's a crazy radical for doing that? No, of course not. But I didn't know what Black Lives Matter meant. I heard different things. Did it mean literally Black Lives Matter? Was it a political program and platform with very specific ideas like defund the police? Was it just a movement to reclaim Black dignity in the face of what happened to George Floyd and other victims? I just couldn't tell what it was. And I remember walking down the streets of New York, hearing these BLM protesters say, fuck the police. And I thought to myself, that doesn't sound like the civil rights movement, of the 1960s. And so I just didn't know what we were talking about when we spoke the words Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people really do. When they just hear the sentence Black Lives Matter and they think, oh, it's Black Lives Matter too. This is something we're for. And if you're against that, you're probably like some alt-right, neo-Nazi, racist, KKK, whatever. But if you look more into like what they're advocating for and look more into what people like Sean King and Patrice Cullors and Alicia Garza and their like self-proclaimed Marxism and their definite hypocrisy, like with Patrice Cullors getting like $1 million homes for vacation based off the donations. It really shows they don't really give a fuck about black people at all.
Yeah. And I don't know, is that Black Lives Matter or is it the pastor who has this sign in front of his church who says Black Lives Matter? I mean, why doesn't he get to claim Black Lives Matter? I mean, is it an organization or is it a loosely organized movement? I don't know. That said, I yearn for an environment that allows people to talk to each other. And I think an environment that doesn't allow people to talk to each other, that is dogmatic in nature, that tells people exactly what they must think and what they can't think, that treats them like thought criminals when they don't think exactly what the prescribed pieties of the day are supposed to be, that's not an environment that is healthy for society or healthy for the Jewish people who tend to be the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, I think a lot of our elite universities in America have become part of the problem because they have been promoting like all these like say no to hate speech, what like one-sided ideology. I think it was in the fire. I think I could be wrong, but I think Harvard was ranked like dead last on free
Dead
speech and
last. I think it's
yeah,
228 out of 228 of the schools. They do this
wow,
annual survey, and I think Penn was second to last.
really? Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah. And what that tells you a lot about the intellectual environment on these places. If people say that they can't engage in open conversation and that there's this strict orthodoxy in place, that tells you a lot about the overall ideological environment. That tells you a lot about, and I tell this to my Jewish friends who think, okay, we've got to prevent anti-Jewish hate speech. I said, look, the more free speech oriented a campus is, the more likely it is to have positive views toward Jews in Israel. So don't think that you're going to solve this problem by shutting down quote unquote hate speech. You're not. The only way you solve this problem is to push the ideology out and to put it back in its place rather than being dominant in a place like Harvard or Penn.
Yeah, I actually read earlier today, places like New York University, Harvard, Pennsylvania University, University of California, Berkeley, they've all actually been sued for campus anti-Semitism by students. Apparently, I heard that Harvard's uh, Jewish student rate actually decreased 60%.
Yeah, it has. Now, that may not be because of anti-Semitism, and that may be because of equity. That may
Yeah.
be because they're looking for proportionate representatives, and Jews are either being singled out quad Jews, or because Jews are being lumped in with whites, and that they're trying to shrink the white population at Harvard. Either way, Jews are a much smaller percentage of Harvard than they were even just 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, the Asians too, actually. I remember this whole issue with Harvard a couple of years ago where they were trying to decrease the Asian population because they had just too many Asians. We need more people of color, even though Asians aren't whites.
Right. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're treated as white adjacent population because they're successful. And the assumption in sort of woke terms is that if if the only reason why a certain group is doing worse than average is because of white supremacy or racism, that means that the only reason why a group like Asians or Jews are doing better than average must be because they're complicit in that white racism that holds down people of color or other people of color, so that they've taken advantage of their sort of conditional whiteness to be able to do well. And I think obviously that's, first of all, it's silly, and second of all, it's destructive.
Do you think anti-Semitism has actually gotten worse through the last couple of generations? Because every time I think about like racism, it's obvious to think that things have actually gone more progressive, things have gone better. But with Jews, I'm actually not so sure. There was this recent study from the Skeptic Research Center on if Jews and Israel are secretly controlling the US and the US media. And it was the millennials and the Zoomers that had the highest rates. I think millennials, like 25% of them thought Jews are controlling us secretly, and 20% of Zoomers thought the same thing.
Yeah, it's strange how that works. Potentially, is that and that's probably more than anything the result of a society that is fraying, a society that's being torn apart at its seams. Tends to be a place where Jews are going to bear the brunt. That's always how it's been for Jews. So what happens is as radical ideology on both the right and the left become more dominant and crowd out the middle, um, that's there could the conspiracy theories and the crazy dogmas give rise to anti-Semitism. So if you're willing to believe that, that immigrants are taking over and there's white genocide or whatever, it's very easy then to believe that 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 Jews are part of the problem, that Jews are bringing in all those immigrants, as you hear in the Great Replacement theory. I think it's New York Times columnist Bret Stephens who said something to the effect that if people are willing to believe anything about anything, they'll believe anything about Jews. And I think that's the same on the left. So if you're willing to believe that American society today is dominated by sort of a white power structure and that's holding down minorities, very easy to see Jews wrapped up into that power structure. And so both sides of the political spectrum are producing their own variants of anti-Semitism. And I think that's because when people feel profoundly insecure, when people don't feel a place in society, when they don't have a meta narrative of belonging in society and the like, they start to search for simplistic explanations for why things haven't gone well for them, for their families, for their communities. And that's when anti-Semitism finds fertile ground.
It's actually kind of almost comedic in a way that both the far right and the far left are in agreement about the Jews. Like, they'll disagree on everything else but on race, but the Jews, yeah, we're on the same page.
Yeah, we call that horseshoe theory. The farther you get in one direction, the more likely you are to converge with the other.
Yeah, and I I assume you're active on Twitter or X, whatever the fuck we're calling it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like there's a lot of talk about Israel and Hamas. I'm constantly seeing like a bunch of like pro-Palestine stuff, but a lot of my friends, a lot of the good ones, and a lot of people I was actually surprised, like Mark Hamill, were promoting some pro-Israel stuff, which I was glad to see. And just out of curiosity, I know the answer to this, but I'll just ask anyways. What's your stance on Israel?
Yeah, well, look, I've spent my life being part of Israel, traveling to Israel. I have a ton of family. My mom is from Baghdad, Iraq, and almost all of her family from Baghdad, Iraq went to Israel in the early 1950s and so forth. So I have large extended family in Israel. I've probably been to Israel more than 60 times. I've taken groups over the years to Israel, delegations to Israel and the like. So obviously, I feel very attached to the country and so forth. And watching this discourse unfold here, particularly during the war, is surreal. Like this idea that Israel's committing genocide. I mean, the Israelis didn't didn't want this war. In fact, they thought that Hamas had sort of reconciled itself to governing Gaza, and they allowed more Gazan workers to come into Israel as day workers than they had for years. So there were more than 20,000 Gazans a day coming into Israel to do jobs during the period right before October 7th. The Israelis now understand that they can't live side by side with Hamas, and that the
Yeah.
communities in the south on the border towns, places like Sderot and Kibbutz Be'eri and others, they just can't survive in that area. It's just too dangerous. And so this war is about restoring security for those communities so that those hundreds of thousands of people that live in that area can go back to their homes. And any country that was being attacked like Israel, if this were happening from Canada or Mexico, imagine what the United States would do. I mean, if they came in and slaughtered 10,000 people, I know it was more like 1,200, but okay, do it in proportion to the size of Israel. If they slaughtered 30,000 people in the United States, 40,000 people in the United States in the course of a day, imagine what the United States would do. We think that they would allow the people who did that to continue to exist and to pose a threat to them? Absolutely not. The United States would do everything they could to push that group out of power, which is what Israel's doing now. Now it's
Yeah.
ugly. I mean, it's not nice to see these areas devastated, and some of that devastation is wrought by Hamas itself. I mean, a lot of these buildings are booby trapped. So when Israel goes in, these are booby trap buildings. Now, doesn't mean that Israel's not bombing buildings too. They are. The Israelis have, in their overwhelming best interest, um, need to minimize civilian casualties. Now that's not easy. Gaza is a very densely populated place. It's one of the most densely populated places in the world. And B, Hamas intentionally puts its civilians in harm's way to prevent Israel from bombing certain areas. There are rumors around now that Sinwar, who is the military head of Hamas and the mastermind of this attack, has surrounded himself with Israeli hostages, and the Israelis know exactly where he is, but can't bomb because the hostages are there. So that's their MO in Hamas's MO. And of course, in that situation, there's going to be a lot of civilian casualties. So what's the goal of the war? The goal of the war is to dismantle Hamas's military wing and its political wing so that it can no longer pose a threat to Israel. And unfortunately, that's a messy affair.
I honestly do find it disturbing that people are more upset with Israel for trying to reduce as many civilian casualties as possible than they are at Hamas, who has no problem using human shields.
Yeah.
And if Israel was the bad guy, that they would have just bombed them immediately, but they're
I
not
mean,
doing that.
the Israelis could have, if Israel was really quote unquote engaging in genocide, they would have completely slaughtered the Palestinian population. There would be no Gazans left. I mean, they could have destroyed Gaza in a matter of 2 days, 3 days, easily. And they instead, and they've been blamed for this, the Israelis pushed the Gazan population in northern Gaza into southern Gaza so that they could fight where the Hamas stronghold in northern Gaza. And people were saying, "Well, that's an act of ethnic cleansing." It's not an act of ethnic cleansing. It's an act of it's meant to protect the civilian population of war. There would be many times more casualties had Israel not done that. So if you're saying that Israel can't do that because there's just too many casualties, then you're really saying that Israel has to live with a hostile power on its borders that's promised that it's going to continue to invade into Israel. It's promised it's going to do that. And I think that no country would do that. Now, that means, unfortunately, that a lot of innocent Palestinians are going to die along the way because the government that is in power is doing that. But I think we're engaging in and I have an article I'm coming out about this, in the kind of moral aestheticism is what I call it. It's a confusion of what looks bad with what is bad. It's not moral reasoning. They're not saying, okay, did Israel bomb this building in a way that was malicious, or did it try to minimize casualties in the process of trying to bomb Hamas leaders? And you have to go through that process of trying to figure out what happened here, right? What actually happened here? Did the Israelis try to inflict more casualties, or did they try to minimize casualties? Just war theory, which is a moral philosophical discipline that's been around for hundreds of years, has a lot of wisdom here that people in the mainstream media and academia are not really applying. So they're applying what I would call a moral aesthetic. What looks bad must be bad. And I think that's the exact wrong way to try to grapple with what's happening, because what it'll do is it'll make it impossible for any country to defend its own citizens. If a country can't do what Israel's doing now in order to protect its citizens, then you're saying that country has to forever accept its plight of being bombed by a hostile force. And I don't think any country is going to do that. So maybe this is a new moral sensibility that's emerged, perhaps linked to wokeness and the like, or maybe this is something very specifically targeted toward Jews in Israel. I don't know, or a little bit of both.
They're also like I think it was in the UK, they were tearing down like those wanted posters, and a lot of these people were just kind of smug about it, really proud, and it's really weird that they think that Israel could look somehow worse than Hamas right now, but that somehow justifies them tearing down wanted posters of civilians.
Yeah, it's so
Just
gross to watch that. It was just so
yeah.
disheartening to see people do that on these campuses and in cities and the like. I mean, just ridiculous. Like these are young people and old people. Like they've been captured by a terrorist force. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with Israel's war effort. You can still criticize that, but why do you have to somehow delegitimize Israel's desire to bring its hostages home? That's the kind of thing that makes people like me wonder if this is just sort of a category of anti-Semitism. I mean, do
Yeah.
you do that with any other country? Do you deny the mass rape of Israeli women? Would you deny that with any other country where women experience mass rape from a hostile force? I think it's an ugliness, and it feels like a really horrible double standard that is being applied to Israel. And that's why a lot of American Jews, I think, and Jews from countries around the world are very uneasy about this current moment. And the one thing this is a reminder of, and I always remind my fellow Jews of this, is that like we're badly outnumbered. There's something like 50 members of the UN from Muslim countries. I think there are 22 Arab states right now. And there's one Israel. There are, I don't know how many billion exactly Muslims. Is it 1.8 billion Muslims? And there's only 15 million Jews.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how that translates into the ability of the Arab Muslim side to dictate a certain narrative. You can imagine how that affects the way NGOs that are surrounding the United Nations, that are part of the United Nations network, how that affects their thinking, because they're being dominated by a much larger force that has much greater power to set the narrative. So, despite the Jewish conspiracy theory that we dictate what everybody else thinks, actually, we're on the losing end of this. I mean, the Jewish power, whatever way in the United States, is pales in comparison to the much larger power of the Arab world and the Arab lobby in the UN.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like some of my personal friends who are on the right, little too far right for my taste at times, but overall pretty good guys, and how they also have like their anti-Israel and anti-Gaza views. But it's really weird hearing from them because they bring up like the SS Liberty, and they like to bring
Yeah,
up how it's not our problem, and it's we got to be America first, and like we shouldn't be sending them all this money because it's not about us. But I keep thinking to myself, if we just bail on Israel and Hamas just defeats them and takes them over, they'll have access to nuclear codes. How's that not our problem? We have like Muslim immigrants coming to different like European countries like Sweden and I think Denmark and Germany and of some UK, and you'll see like the crime rates and the rape rates have actually increased ever since they do. And honestly, this could be a problem for us too, you know?
of course. I mean, look, we can enjoy our security being surrounded by oceans in Canada and Mexico, but we live in an interdependent world. I mean, we get resources from other places in the world. We trade. Our lifestyle is intricately linked to how other countries behave in a destabilized world, one in which bad actors are able to do whatever they want. We're ultimately not going to be able to protect ourselves. There was a bit of America pre-World War II was very isolationist, and many of those very attitudes were popular until Japan came and attacked us in Pearl Harbor, and we realized once again that we were part of the world. We couldn't remain in our splendid isolation. So I think, of course, the United States cares about what happens elsewhere. Does that mean that we need to intervene in everybody's war all the time? No. Could we be more sparing in how we use our military might? Yes. But, look, I mean, you have the Houthis in Yemen who are attacking ships that are American ships, by the way. An American ship was for the first time actually hit by a Houthi rocket just in the last couple of days. So, we can't pretend like we're not part of that world. Do we want to allow a very aggressive Iranian state to dominate the Middle East, to dominate our allies, to dominate Saudi Arabia, to dominate United Arab Emirates? Is that what we want? Do we think that that's not going to spill over into our own interests? And I think that's just it's just profoundly naive to think that the United States can function that way, can function in splendid isolation. It can't, and it won't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got into a bit of a Twitter dispute with Jay Klein from what was it?
Yeah,
What was it called? That was a Fair Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. That's where he works at. Yeah,
yeah,
I remember I was reading that,
yeah. I
and
don't think he was speaking. I don't think he was speaking for he wasn't speaking for fair. He was speaking for himself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just meant he works from Fair. That I was trying to figure out where he because
He
he's also an
does.
AFL number, and I'm also from AFL. Overall, I think he's a pretty good guy, and I think he's a pretty reasonable guy. But he just seems to have this strange hatred when it comes to
I think
Israel.
he's a Yeah, so Jake grew up in the same area where I live. My kids went to school. He went to the same Jewish private school that my older son went to,
Mhm.
and I think he had his parents probably imposed Judaism on a way that on him, and he was not a good fit, and he rebelled against it hard. And he sort of has a chip on his shoulder. I mean, I think he's a good guy. I think he means well. I think he's wrong on a lot of this. I think he's got sort of a little too much out for Israel. I think he's
Yeah.
intellectually inconsistent in some of the things that he says, which I would gladly say. And if he were on this podcast, maybe you can bring him together with me. I don't know. That'd be fun. And so we disagree. I'm sure. Look, I also agree with him on a lot of things. We're both critics of woke ideology. We're both supporters of a liberal society. We both believe in the free exchange of ideas. But I think we disagree around some of these issues around Israel and Judaism. I mean, I'm myself consider myself sort of an agnostic. So I'm not here to like make the case for any religious position. Jews have always been both an ethnic national community as well as a religion, and there's a deep tradition of Jewish atheism, um, and um, so I don't think that's where we disagree. I'm less sort of hostile to the idea of religion than he is, or probably you are, I would imagine. I think that that religion plays a role in society that can be bad or good. But again, I think Jake has reified Judaism into some, religion that he opposed growing up. Whereas I grew up in a very liberal Jewish household, right? My parents didn't tell me what to believe or not believe. I never once my parents said you have to believe X, Y, or Z. I was not. If I would have told my parents at age 8 that I was an atheist, it would have been no problem. So I grew up in a Reformed Jewish household, which had a much sort of more liberal view of Judaism and theology and so forth. And you can go to synagogue. I go to a conservative Jewish synagogue today. I go Saturdays, not every Saturday, but sometimes. And the word God is invoked, but no one really talks about God in a very real way. It's sort of like there probably are a lot of agnostics, people who read all the prayers, but don't have a very strong view about God or their relationship with God. Like the God I don't believe in is not the spaghetti monster in the sky. The God I don't believe in might be some kind of universal force in the universe that and do I believe in that? I don't, not really, but I don't really completely deny it, or I don't completely discount it, might be the right word, either. So okay, like I don't have to resolve that question, but I'm not unusual in the Jewish community at all. And I think Jake and people like Jake, who grew up very differently in a more like an Orthodox Jewish home and maybe were told what they had to think and believe, are rebelling against something that I had no need to rebel from.
He does come across as having a bit of a bias because when I've seen his tweets, every time he talks about Israel, you could say the exact same thing about Gaza supporters and Muslims, but um, except it applies to them way more than the criticisms he's had for Jews, like the dual loyalty comments he made. And
Yeah, ridiculous. Like,
you have
yeah,
Muslims from the UK who literally joined ISIS. I
yeah.
mean,
I mean, what does dual loyalty to Israel actually mean? For the vast majority of American Jews, they love America. They're patriotic toward America. They love Israel. They have a deep family connection to Israel, an affinity to Israel. It doesn't mean that very rarely is any American Jew in a situation where they have to choose between America and Israel. And if they're in the intelligence establishment, let's say the United States is withholding intelligence from Israel, then their obligation is to abide by the laws and abide by the dictates of that job. Like they shouldn't be, unless they thought that the country was going to be imminently destroyed by withholding that information. I think that would be a different moral argument, but that's, as far as I know, never happened. Then why should any Jew ever be in that situation of actually living through dual loyalty? There have been a couple cases of spying in the course of 75 years. There was the case of Jonathan J. Pollard, who was a Navy intelligence officer who was cultivated by the Israelis and spied on the United States. And by the way, he was not a champion of the pro-Israel. I mean, he was not a darling of the pro-Israel community. Far from it. We saw him as a sellout and as a dangerous presence, and he compromised American Jews in government at that time. And I think he's a quack, frankly. Um, so I feel no tension between my Americanness and my Jewishness and my support for Israel at all. And I could be in the American army and be proud, and I could be in the Israeli army and be proud. So I don't know what the problem is. I think it's like he's looking to say, oh, look at these American Jews who are training their kids to want to go to Israel and fight in the Israeli army. First of all, it's a very small percentage. I mean, yes, a higher percentage of American Jews have gone to Israel than ever before, but it's usually like a 7-day mission on a birthright trip to Israel. It's not like that they're joining the Israeli army. I mean, that there are a few activists like me who did that, but I didn't join the Israeli army, but I did programs in Israel and so forth. But that's a small percentage.
I think he was using a bit of an anecdotal fallacy because he did specifically talk about Jews he grew up with and how like most of them joined the Israeli army, but none of them joined the U.S. military. And
Even among those people, there was still probably a handful in his class joined the Israeli army because they were children of Israelis. That's the other thing. We live in the Washington, D.C. area, so you have a lot of Israeli diplomats, former diplomats and business people who come here because it's Washington, right? And they stay here for several years. They may work for the Israeli embassy, and their kids then go to the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, where my kids went to. And a high percentage of those, I mean, some of those their kids go back to Israel and they join the army. They're children of Israelis, so of course they're going to have that kind of relationship. Very few American-born, non-Israeli kids are going back to the army. There's some. I have friends whose children went into 2-3 years in the army. And then, by the way, then they come back to NYU and finish their degree in the United States. So what? So they're dual Israeli American citizens. Most of them go back to the United States and they live very American lives.
you know, using my own anecdote, I actually have a friend who's currently serving in the Israeli military. She's kind of like you. She was she's a Jew, raised in America, very patriotic about both countries. When she was 16, she and her family moved back to Israel because they wanted her to like experience what it's like to live there, and she joined the Israeli military because she knew about how about like the issues between Gaza and Israel, and she really wanted to like help and serve her country, and I thought that's pretty reasonable. I mean, oh, the U.S., we're not under constant like bomb threats or
Yeah.
missile strikes. Like it makes sense that you'd want to go to your home country who is under constant threat and try to help as much as possible.
Yeah. I know a young man who uh, went to Israel, joined an Israeli infantry unit. He's now in his late 20s and he came back to the United States. And then when the Gaza war happened, he went back to Israel just to fight with his unit. His father was a Navy SEAL in the United States. I know he's deeply patriotic in the United States, a deeply patriotic American. There was no conflict for him. And so I don't know why others are going to see a conflict in that. But I mean, I don't think most American Jews see Israel as their country. They see Israel as a place that they have a strong affinity to. And there's no question that the majority of American Jews support Israel, but they support it as sort of a as a Jewish country, not their own homeland.
One thing I kind of wanted to bring up, what I've noticed is a handful of ex-Muslims actually seem to be pretty in favor of Israel. People like Ayan Hirsi Ali and Armin Navabi and Bosch Foston and Yasmin Mohammed, I believe. I could be wrong, but I haven't actually looked up her
Yeah,
thoughts, so I don't
I
want to
think
like.
her father. I think her father actually lived in Gaza or was a Gazan. I think she's
Give
certainly a reasonable person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. So I think it's interesting, like how a lot of these ex-Muslims realize that Israel is the safest, freest country, most tolerant country in the Middle East, because they themselves understand like how dangerous of an ideology Islam is.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you imagine being, you know, gay and thinking that that Gaza and Hamas is a better place for you than Tel Aviv? I mean, Tel Aviv's like the most gay city in the world. I mean, I think there's the biggest per capita gay pride parade in Tel Aviv than anywhere in the world. And you're going to be better off being in Gaza or the West Bank where they'll throw you off a roof.
Yeah,
I
I was
mean,
thinking about that.
yeah, it's just crazy. So if you believe in liberty and you believe in the free exchange of ideas, I mean, is Israel a perfect place? No. Are there problems? Yeah. Can you basically speak your mind in Israel? Absolutely. Can you basically live the life you want in Israel? Absolutely. Can you be religious? Yes. Can you be completely secular? Yes. Can you be an atheist? Yes. Well, all those, like, it's a free society. Um, and um, and there's a huge gulf between free societies and unfree societies. And people don't understand that. Maybe you have to live in a place like that for a while. It's like these young British Pakistani girls who go try to marry an ISIS fighter and realize that they just made a huge mistake. I of you're dealing with a different civilization in a way, and that has completely different values. And when you hear part of the left view that civilization that treats women differently, that hates homosexuality, that only believes there's one way to think about the world, and that if you don't believe in God or you don't believe in Islam, then um, you're an infidel. That's and you somehow side with them rather than the only Western style country in the region that has thrived in comparison to all those other countries. I mean, thrived. 75 years under duress, it's maintained its democratic values and institutions, not without challenge, but definitely has remained so. It's a country that is thriving economically. I think its gross domestic product is higher than both Great Britain and Japan. It's got probably more Nobel Prize winners than any society on earth per capita. It's got a vibrant high tech sector, and you think that that's the oppressive country? I mean, come on, it's just so ridiculous. But that's what people have been fed. That's the story that they've been fed. They also view Israel as the white guy and Gaza as the brown guy. All you have to do is go into the airport in Israel and you see how brown the country actually is, how ethnic it actually is. You know, and you'll see black people and black soldiers and very brown people, and more than half the country is of Middle Eastern descent. So to think that somehow that it's just a white European colonial country sort of begs credulity. And I think that we when you're this when the funny thing is that the people who relate to that narrative, they don't realize that they're the ones who have bought into the dominant narrative. They're the ones who have been bought into the power structure. They've allowed themselves to be lured into believing that deeply undemocratic, radical, extremist, misogynistic societies are in the right. They're the ones because those voices are dominant. They're the ones who have bought into that narrative, not us.
So yeah, kind of makes me think back to when I was a teenager, and I think I was like 15 or 16 at the time, and I was going through my political conversion phase because I got away into a controversy when I was 13 years old after becoming an atheist, and went through my little liberal atheist douchebag phase who just wanted to talk shit about Christianity. And by the age of 16, or I came to the conclusion that just Islam is the worst religion that's ever existed. And I remember always being like pro-Israel because it seemed just so obvious that Israel is in the right. But then I'm looking at some of these YouTubers that I was a fan of at the time, and they were promoting like these kind of like these pro-Palestine stuff, like saying the like one example I could think of was this like meme of a guy posted of this guy like knocking down a beehive and the bees attacking him and going like, why are they attacking? And like the beehive said like Israel, and the guy said like Hamas or Gaza or something. Then this YouTuber, Amazing Atheist, he said something like, if only they were attacking the people who poked the beehive. And I thought, they are like that's why they're trying to get the civilians out of the way when Hamas uses human shields. And I keep seeing like more sympathy towards Palestine, like more free Palestine stuff. And I keep wondering, like it just seems so obvious that Israel's the good guy here. Am I just coming to the conclusions wrong here? Am I wrong? Am
Look,
I making a mistake?
I think it is a complex conflict. I mean,
Yeah.
Israel's not been perfect in the conflict. I don't want to pretend like Israel's this perfect country and always in the right. I think is these if Israel was dealing with a normal enemy that ultimately wanted to live in side by side in peace, they would have solved the conflict decades ago. Like I think
Yeah.
so, and I think that people are in denial of that. Like the Israelis offered Palestinians a full fledged state in the early 2000s on multiple occasions, and they just unleashed this torrent of terrorism against Israel. Look, I'm a little bit more charitable toward Islam than I think you are. I think that there are peaceful versions of Islam, that Islam's not one thing. There are Sufi Muslims who I think are quite peaceful and have a different theology. I think there are countries that are majority Muslim that are not really radical. That there might be radicals in those places like Malaysia and Indonesia and so forth, but I don't think that the entire countries are radical, are made up by majority Islamist population. I think what you get it when you bring like sort of the Arab shame honor society together with Islam, you're more likely to see that toxic mix of culture and religion that produces radicalism than you are in some of these other countries that don't really have that narrative. And the Islamist idea, the Muslim Brotherhood idea, is that Islam that Israel and America are able to dominate because they were better believers to Allah than Muslims. So if Muslims want to win back the loyalty of God, they've got to be true to their religion, and then God will treat them, the Jews and the Christians, as the infidels that they are, but only then. So that's sort of what gives rise to this radicalism and the anti-Semitism in the Arab and Muslim world, and the inability really to live side by side in peace. Are there Muslims in Gaza and West Bank who would gladly live side by side in peace with Israel? Of course, but they're drowned out by the radicals, and they don't have a lot of legitimacy. I remember in was it 2011 during the Arab Spring in Egypt, and hopes for the first time in many years that there could be democratization in the Muslim world. There was this energized democratic movement, and so they managed to depose Hosni Mubarak, and right after that, Morsi, who is a Muslim Brotherhood leader, comes to power in Egypt. And there were people on the Arab street who weren't going to all those pro-democracy protests who said Islam is the only answer. Islam is the only answer. So there's no, while there may be enough democracy in the Arab world to produce 1 million people in an Arab capital to protest for democracy, but there's not enough to sustain a real democratic movement at this point in time. And to somehow think that these countries are the victims is just delusional.
I believe it's also worth pointing out that a lot of the biggest victims of these Muslim theocracies are other Muslims. The Muslims weren't following the right religion or right version of their religion.
Sure.
And really there are just when it comes to like Muslim theocracies, there really are there's no upside to them. Like if you just don't believe in exactly how we believe it, if you don't follow it to the letter, if women have any sight of freedom, if a gay couple express themselves in any way, you deserve to die. And
Yeah.
honestly, I think we need more secularism like we have in Israel.
Yeah, secularism, and there are moderate versions of religion that
Mhm.
don't call for mass murder. I mean, and in fact are quite civilizing forces in my view. They sort of take the ancient wisdom and they're not and the people who practice those religions, whether it is a liberal form of Judaism or a liberal form of Christianity or a liberal form of Islam. I mean, they're not trying to convert anybody. They're not trying to impose their views on other people. They're just living lives of meaning and community. It's sometimes hard to be purely secular in society. People are looking for tribes that give them a sense of community and meaning, and and that are sources of wisdom. That's how I understand religion, more than just a belief system. And that's why I can sort of separate myself from the belief system to be part of that tribe, to be a member of that tribe. And to the degree, and if now like and so I do think that form of liberal religion can be healthy for societies. It gives people a sense of meaning. And by the way, you see what happens when societies become rapidly secularized without religion at all. They can end up just buying into other meta narratives like wokeness. I mean, look at how many people. It's not like they go and buy into that the alternative to religion is rationalism. I wish it were the case, like that the alternative to religion was rationalism, that everybody became this rational persons and got their book on fallacies and knew which fallacies were to avoid and so forth, and became excellent critical thinkers because they're no longer influenced by dogmatic religious traditions. Okay, if that were the case, fine, but it's not. And so I think when the absence of meanings often leads people to other sources of meaning that actually are even more dogmatic than they left. See, the thing about, like, let's say modern Christianity and Judaism is that they're very well calibrated to democratic life because they've been around for a long time. Like Christianity had to reconcile itself to a degree with democratic life, as Judaism, like American Judaism, is very at home in American democratic life. Islam, obviously, much less so. Islam has never had to reconcile itself to democratic life and doesn't have an easy version of itself that it can live in peace with democracy. So in places like the United States or Great Britain, when religion declines, you have to worry that it's just going to be replaced by another meta narrative that is less reconciled to democratic life than those original forms of religion are. And I feel like that's what's happened here, is that like wokeness is the ultimate meta narrative. It's like explains everything. I don't think it's a religion in the sense exactly, but it's built upon sort of a puritanical religious ideal. And I think it has a lot of the same core beliefs and sort of moral reasoning as Christianity does. And so I think we have, that's why I've heard increasingly a lot of especially a lot of the sort of new atheist folks that I knew um, have sort of relaxed their views toward religion a little bit. Like it's not that they changed their views and all of a sudden now I didn't believe in the spaghetti monster in the sky. Now I do believe in the spaghetti monster in the sky. No, they just say, okay, maybe I was a little too optimistic about what would happen when religion left us. And maybe now I see what the alternatives are, and I don't like those even. I mean, like take like a Peter Boghossian, for example. He's a philosopher, whatever, a rationalist. He was a hardcore new atheist, but all of a sudden, he's now faced with wokeism, and that affects him much more drastically than religious Christianity ever could. No religious Christian ever tried to stop him from having a different philosophical view in the United States, at least. Maybe if he was part of some illiberal society. Yet that's exactly what wokeism tried to do. It tries to shut him down and make it impossible to discuss things. So anyway, that's a rant.
I'm actually like 50-50 on if I should just insert like my views on like new atheism and wokeness, or if I should just try to like end the conversation now, because I think we've almost hit an hour. You know what? Yeah, let's just end this on something a bit more positive. Just some random questions. I'm gonna ask you one more question.
Sure.
So a moment ago, you mentioned that you'd be down to having a conversation with Jake uh, on my
Mhm.
podcast. Would you actually be open with that if I like email him or text him or something? I was like, hey, you want
Sure.
to do a debate against David Bernstein? If he says yes.
Yeah. Tell him it's a friendly debate. Like we'll engage in the spirit of civility. I might even joke and use Jewish language. Like there's a Jewish Hebrew phrase that he won't like at all. Machloket l'shem shemayim, arguments for the sake of heaven. So I'll say we'll do it in that spirit. But yeah, absolutely, of course.
Okay. Because yeah, I'm just gonna be like, I'll try my best to moderate it. Never moderated a day before, but just gonna be honest here. I will probably be more in agreement with you on Israel than him. Just I just don't want to like express those views if the conversation happens. Although I think I'm more in agreement with him when it comes to religion, because I know he's still an anti-theist, and he still thinks that Christianity won't exactly bring us back from the void when it comes to wokeness. And I'm actually in agreement with that. I don't think that wokeness has anything to do with atheism or new atheism. Personally, I think Americans still have Christianity, and a large number of Christians are actually pretty woke. That's what I think. But I, we can
I'm not
disagree.
arguing that Christianity will do that necessarily. I'm not arguing anybody should become Christian because it'll take them back. I know that's what Ayan Hirsi Ali ultimately did. I'm not making any claim. I'm just observing what happened when religion receded from society and how it was filled by other dogmas. And I'm not saying that okay we should return to those dogmas. I'm just saying that we should be less optimistic that secularization will lead to rationalization.
Okay, I get what you mean, but like, maybe we'll have that conversation later. But yeah, right now, I'm just gonna ask just some random questions just for fun.
Sure.
So, first question, who's your favorite founding father?
Probably Jefferson, despite his penchant for owning slaves. I think he was brilliant and really laid the intellectual foundation of this nation.
Yeah, I agree. I'm stuck between him and Thomas Paine. Like Thomas Paine because it was the
Mm,
most unique,
yes.
but Jefferson because he, as Hitchens wrote, the author of America, and that's extremely important for our country. Although he's also one of the hard ones to defend, and honestly, I kind of love that.
Mhm.
Second question. Oh, sorry, do you have something to say?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
All right, second question. Who's your favorite U.S. president?
Probably Lincoln. I mean,
Same.
I read like 5 books about Lincoln. I went through a Lincoln period where I was just reading everything I could. I think he's just a fascinating figure of being like a strong leader with humility at the same time is just an incredible feat of personality.
Yeah, and they're both him and Jefferson are unfortunately victims of modern day cancel culture. Everybody's trying to cancel Jefferson because he owned slaves and he apparently raped Sally Hemings, even though I don't think there's any evidence of that. But
No, I know
sources.
that's what people said. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a conversation with this crazy bitch from my school. I know I'm being rude, but I honestly do not like her. Um,
Yeah, you're that college pressure cooker where you have where people, I mean, we have that too in the working world, professional world, but it's less common.
Yeah, I could rant about her for a while actually, because she's so rude and entitled and disrespectful and honestly pretty sexist. All she does is bitch about men on Snapchat, but she's also supporting Palestine. Yeah,
Right.
that's not very feminist of you, but okay. Okay, so third question, are you working on any new books at the moment?
Yes, I just signed a contract to write a book called Poison Ivy League. And it's going to be about how the what went wrong with the modern day elite university and how to fix it.
Oh, okay, I'm looking forward to that one. Okay,
Yeah,
and
I'm doing a lot of research.
yeah, actually, I kind of want to write a book myself, but I don't really know how to properly do it. Out of curiosity, like, how do you do the research exactly? Do you have to like interview people, or do you just look at like articles and scholarly sources and like put them
You can do
together?
both. You can do both. I'm doing my project that I'm going to do is a podcast and a Substack that emerges out of the podcast, and then it's going to culminate into a book.
Oh, okay. Right, and just last question. What's your favorite book?
What's my favorite book? Um, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I think, is one of the
Uh,
greats. Um, I think you know, someone who could search for meaning amid the horrors of the Holocaust and develop a whole psychological theory about that. And I think it is the perfect antidote to this sort of culture of victimization and trauma that we have today. It's the opposite message. It's one that if you feel a sense of meaning will actually help you survive. Um, and I think that's missing in today's discourse.
right. Yeah, I've been recommended that book a lot. I actually never picked it up and read it yet. I definitely should because I hear like he changed a lot of lives, and I know he's a psychologist. I'm also a psychology major, so I need to read as many
Yeah,
psychology books as possible.
yeah, but he created something called logotherapy, which was about finding a sense of meaning and the like. So yeah, definitely read. It's an easy, short read too.
All right. All right, so yeah, about to end this in a moment.
All
Thanks
right.
for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, and let me know if that debate works out.
Yeah, I will. I'll as soon as I get this uploaded, I'll DM him on Instagram or on Twitter, and I'll ask him if he'd be interested. I assume he will be, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll try to be honest with him about what I believe, and I'll do
Yeah,
my best to just keep my opinions out of it.
yeah, I'm sure it'll be fun. It'll be all in the right good spirit. You can have your opinions. You can be a moderator who has your opinions. Maybe you'll say, I'm more likely to agree with you, Jake, on this and David on that, but I'm open on both. That, and whatever.
All right,
It'll be good. It's all good. We can take it.
all right,
All
all
right.
right.
Thanks a
Let's
million.
yeah. I'll see you around.
See you around. Take care.
You too.